4,000 kilometers. That is the distance between Iran's coastline and the small coral atoll in the middle of the Indian Ocean, where the United States and the United Kingdom have quietly based their most powerful long-range strike aircraft for the better part of 6 decades. It is also, according to everything Western intelligence agencies believed until last Friday, beyond the reach of any ballistic missile Iran possessed. On Friday morning, Iran launched 2 ballistic missiles at that base. The base is called Diego Garcia. The missiles did not hit it, but the fact that they were fired at all has changed the strategic calculus of this war in ways that no official briefing has yet been prepared to fully state. Subscribe to Pivot Analysis right now and turn on notifications. What this channel is documenting here is not a footnote in a larger war. It is a disclosure about Iranian missile capability that every U.S. ally from London to Berlin to Rome is now quietly reassessing. The analysis behind that reassessment is what comes next. Before this week, most people watching the Iran war had no reason to know Diego Garcia existed. That anonymity was by design. The base sits on a horseshoe-shaped atoll in the Chagos Archipelago, a British overseas territory located roughly in the center of the Indian Ocean, equidistant between Africa and Indonesia. The nearest landmass of significance is the island of Sri Lanka, approximately 1,600 kilometers to the north. There are no civilian residents. There is no commercial port. There are approximately 2,500 mostly American military personnel, a runway long enough to accommodate the largest aircraft in the U.S. arsenal, and a deep-water harbor capable of hosting submarines and naval logistics vessels. Diego Garcia was built to be unreachable. It has served as a launch point for U.S. military operations since the Vietnam War era, through the Gulf War of the 1990s, through the 2003 invasion of Iraq, through Afghanistan, through strikes on Yemen's Houthis, and now through the current air campaign against Iran. According to reporting by NBC News and multiple U.S. defense officials, the base is capable of accommodating B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the aircraft that carried bunker-buster munitions used against Iran's hardened underground nuclear facilities in the early weeks of this war. The B-2 has a range that allows it to take off from Diego Garcia, strike targets anywhere in the Middle East, and return without refueling. No Middle Eastern country, no adversarial actor, was thought to have a missile that could reach it. On Friday, March 21, a U.S. official told CNN that Iran launched 2 intermediate-range ballistic missiles at Diego Garcia. According to a source briefed on the matter, cited by Bloomberg, the base suffered no damage. One missile malfunctioned in flight, the other was intercepted. But the question the failed strike opened is not whether Iran can destroy Diego Garcia. The question is whether the assumption of its safety was ever valid to begin with. A ballistic missile with the range to reach Diego Garcia from Iranian territory is not a weapon Iran was publicly known to possess. For nearly a decade, Iran operated under what Jeffrey Lewis, a distinguished scholar of global security at Middlebury College, described to CNN as a self-imposed range limit of 2,000 kilometers, a ceiling on missile development that then Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei reportedly formalized in 2017. The publicly acknowledged justification was that Iran's deterrence needs were regional, not global, and that missiles beyond that range would invite an escalatory response from the West. Diego Garcia sits approximately 4,000 kilometers from Iran's coastline. That is double the stated limit. Look at what this means operationally. A missile that can cover 4,000 kilometers is not a weapon designed to strike Israel or Saudi Arabia or a U.S. base in Qatar. It is a weapon designed to strike targets that were previously considered beyond Iran's reach in the deep Indian Ocean, in South Asia, and depending on launch trajectory, in parts of southern Europe. Israel's chief of staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, stated this plainly in a video statement following the attack. He described the missiles as 2-stage, meaning they use an initial engine to reach near space altitude and a second engine to propel toward the target. He put the range at 4,000 kilometers and added, "These missiles are not intended to strike Israel. Their range extends to the capitals of Europe. Berlin, Paris, and Rome are all within direct threat range." NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte told reporters separately that NATO could not confirm the Israeli characterization that these were intercontinental ballistic missiles rather than intermediate-range ones, but he did not dispute the fundamental range disclosure. The UK Ministry of Defense confirmed the attack occurred and condemned what it called Iran's reckless actions, while noting that neither missile got close to the base. The mechanism behind this attack is two things simultaneously. It is a demonstration of capability, and it is a message to an audience wider than any target in the Middle East. This is not a story about whether two missiles hit a coral atoll in the Indian Ocean. They did not. The base is intact. Operations there are continuing normally, according to UK officials. This is a story about what Iran just disclosed about its weapons inventory and who the intended audience for that disclosure actually was. The intended audience was not the United States. Washington already knew Diego Garcia was theoretically within range of long-range Iranian development programs. The intended audience was London, Brussels, Berlin, Paris, and Rome, the European governments that have, until now, managed to stay largely on the sidelines of this war while allowing diplomatic cover to continue. The Doha Institute's Muhannad Saloom told Al Jazeera precisely this: if you reverse the direction of these missiles from their Indian Ocean trajectory, they reach European capitals. That geographic fact, now demonstrated rather than theorized, changes the political calculus for every NATO government that has been hoping to avoid choosing a side. Look at the timing. The attack on Diego Garcia occurred on Friday morning. On the same Friday afternoon, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office announced that Britain had approved US forces to use Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire for defensive operations against Iranian missile sites threatening Gulf shipping. The UK Ministry of Defense confirmed to CNBC in an email that Iran's unsuccessful targeting of Diego Garcia occurred before that announcement, meaning Iran fired at the base before it formally knew the UK had given its blessing for offensive use. The message Iran sent with those two missiles landed on every European defense ministry the same afternoon. London deepened its commitment to the US campaign. The economic stakes of what happened last Friday extend well beyond the immediate conflict zone, and they arrive in two distinct channels. The first is energy. Diego Garcia is the platform from which B-2 bombers have been conducting strikes against Iran's underground nuclear and missile facilities throughout this war. If that platform were neutralized or rendered operationally uncertain, the U.S. air campaign against Iran would change in character immediately. Missions that currently take off from a stable deep-water base in the Indian Ocean would need to be relocated to aircraft carriers, operating in contested waters, or to bases in the Middle East, already within Iran's established missile range. Each of those alternatives is more expensive, more exposed, and more politically complicated than the current arrangement. The second channel is European energy exposure. The IEA's executive director, Fatih Birol, stated publicly this week that the global energy situation is already worse than the oil shocks of the 1970s combined with the economic fallout of the Ukraine war. European countries consume a significant share of Gulf oil and gas that currently cannot move freely through the Strait of Hormuz. Those same European governments are now learning that Iran possesses missiles with a demonstrated range sufficient to reach their territory. The political cost of maintaining distance from this war just increased substantially. If European governments move from cautious sympathy to active involvement, or, alternatively, if they move toward pressuring the U.S. to de-escalate to protect their own energy supplies, either outcome reshapes the economic trajectory of this conflict in ways that reach ordinary households well outside the Middle East. There is a detail buried in the Diego Garcia story that most coverage has not examined with the seriousness it deserves. CNN reported earlier this month, citing multiple people familiar with U.S. intelligence reporting on the matter, that Russia has been providing Iran with intelligence about the locations and movements of American troops, ships, and aircraft. Much of this intelligence, according to one of those sources, has come from imagery generated by Russia's satellite constellation. Look at why this matters specifically for the Diego Garcia attack. Trita Parsi, an analyst cited by CNN in its Diego Garcia reporting, was direct about the implication. There are large parts of the Indian Ocean where Iran does not have the ability to generate its own targeting intelligence because it does not have satellites operating over that region. So that intelligence, Parsi said, is most likely coming from the Russians and the Chinese. The Washington Post separately confirmed that Russia has been sharing targeting information with Iran, including the locations of American warships and aircraft in the Middle East. A missile fired at a target 4,000 kilometers away in the middle of the Indian Ocean does not leave its launcher without precise coordinates. Someone provided those coordinates. The U.S. and its allies have not publicly named who that was. But the intelligence community's assessment, as reported by CNN and the Washington Post, points toward Russian satellite imagery as the most plausible source. If that assessment is correct, the Diego Garcia attack was not purely an Iranian operation. It was a joint intelligence exercise in which one nuclear power provided targeting data to another state actively at war with the United States. Subscribe to Pivot Analysis and turn on notifications. This channel reads the primary sources, connects the elements that official communications are keeping separate, and delivers the analysis before the mainstream framing has settled. The Russia dimension of this story has received a fraction of the coverage that the missiles themselves received. That gap is where the real story lives. To be fair, there is a competing interpretation of the Diego Garcia incident, and it deserves direct engagement. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai denied the attack entirely on Monday, dismissing it as an Israeli false flag operation and accusing Israel of fabricating the incident to draw European countries into the conflict. He pointed specifically to the fact that NATO Secretary General Rutte was unable to confirm Israel's specific characterization of the missiles as intercontinental ballistic missiles, suggesting the technical claims were inflated. UK Housing Secretary Steve Reed said on Sunday that the UK had no indication Iran intended to or could reach the UK itself with its missiles. This interpretation has some basis in documented fact. The missiles failed. Neither got close, according to UK officials. NATO did not confirm the ICBM designation, and Israel has a clear strategic interest in presenting Iran's capabilities as a European-level threat in order to widen the coalition supporting the military campaign. Where this interpretation runs into difficulty is the UK's own Ministry of Defense statement. London confirmed the attack occurred. The semi-official Iranian news agency Mehr itself reported that missiles targeted what it called the military base of the oppressors in Diego Garcia, a disclosure that contradicts Tehran's subsequent denial. Iran's foreign ministry may be calling this a false flag, but Iran's own state-adjacent media was reporting the launch as a success before the denial was issued. 3 indicators will tell us in the coming weeks whether Friday's attack was an isolated demonstration or the opening of a new phase in this war's geographic scope. Watch the Chagos Islands sovereignty question. Diego Garcia sits on a British overseas territory that London agreed in 2024 to cede sovereignty over to Mauritius under a 9-year lease arrangement. Trump publicly urged Starmer not to give away Diego Garcia in February, even as his administration had officially backed the deal. If Iran's attack produces renewed pressure from Washington to renegotiate those sovereignty terms, or if Mauritius, a close Chinese ally, uses the moment to create political complications around base access, the operational continuity of Diego Garcia as a U.S. strike platform comes into question through a diplomatic channel rather than a military one. Watch European defense posture. If Germany, France, or Italy make formal statements addressing the range disclosure directly, rather than the generic calls for ceasefire that have characterized European responses so far, that signals the missile demonstration achieved its strategic purpose of forcing European capitals to reckon with their own exposure. Silence from European defense ministries would be the more analytically significant response. It would mean governments absorbed the disclosure and chose not to publicly acknowledge it. Watch for a second Iranian attempt. The first attack involved 2 missiles. One malfunctioned, one was intercepted. Neither was accurate enough to strike the base, even if the defenses had failed. If Iran fires again with different targeting data, with a different missile configuration, it means the first launch was reconnaissance as much as it was demonstration. And the next one will tell us whether the coordinates Russia provided were close or precise. The base that was built to be beyond reach has now been targeted. The missiles missed, but the assumptions that made Diego Garcia feel safe for 6 decades have not been restored. They have been permanently questioned. Whether Iran fires again, and what it fires, will tell us more about the true state of its missile program than any intelligence assessment yet made public.